for an intruder. The New South Wales government has given 6 companies the green light to search for uranium in New South Wales. The Minister for Resources and Energy, Anthony Roberts, says, however, there are still bans on uranium mining in the state. And the US energy giant Chevron says it's trying to improve telecommunications on the country's biggest resources project after a worker killed himself last month. The man committed suicide on the Gorgon project off the northwest coast of WA, and the telecommunications system there needing to be upgraded, quite poor. The suggestion being that if it was better, people could get in touch with family and loved ones more easily. Fran.
Thanks very much, James. 28 to 8 on breakfast, and on that topic, really, later in this half hour, we'll be speaking about Are You OK Day. It is today. Are you OK? It's a simple question. It can have a really dramatic effect on someone's life, someone's state of mind. Ask someone, are you OK? And don't just ask it, be prepared to stick around and listen. It's 27 minutes to 8. Let's have a look at the weather. In Brisbane, sunny and 27. Sydney, sunny and 23. Canberra, mostly sunny and 17. In Melbourne, some showers, heading to a top of 16 degrees. Hobart, showers and 14 degrees. In Adelaide, morning showers and 18. Perth, partly cloudy and 22. Darwin, sunny and 33. And in Alice Springs, partly cloudy and 29 degrees. It's 27 minutes to 8. Warwick Hatfield, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
And Warwick, a couple of bridges too far for Manly Warringah ahead of the NRL finals.
Yeah, Fran, the good story. This the Sea Eagles, of course, they come from the northern beaches of Sydney. They've made seething peninsularity a bit of an art form over the years. They love playing at Brookvale Oval, Brookie in the vernacular. It's a bit of a fortress there, and having finished the home and away season ahead of South Sydney, might have thought, well, they've earned a game on that dunghill. Instead, the Spoil Sports at NRL headquarters have them crossing not just the Spit Bridge, which is not named after some of the lesser habits of Manly supporters, but they've also got to cross the Harbour Bridge as well, and as we all know, well, that takes its toll. There was something, though, for the Sea Eagles folk to be happy about yesterday. Champion fullback Brett Stewart declared fit. Now, he didn't play in the game last weekend against North Queensland because of an ankle injury, but he trained the house down yesterday. And elsewhere in rugby league, Cronulla Sutherland continues to attract strife. The NRL now investigating the club's Mad Monday festivities, which included a topless waitress. In rugby union, a story did the rounds yesterday that will have sent shivers through both of the rugby codes, and not because anyone was missing a warm top. Matt Giteau, who hasn't been seen in a Wallaby jumper for yonks, is on the market for $1.4 million in French rugby. Now, when you consider his age, he's in his 30s, but toss in what he still continues to achieve despite that, and then look at the much younger talent that makes up both codes in this country, well, you could easily imagine the cashed-up French clubs that don't get to sign Giteau trying to find out everything they could about Israel Folau, Kurtley Beale, or in rugby league, Greg Inglis and Billy Slater. As one of the last gentlemen amateurs, Peter Fitzsimons, puts it so starkly in the Sydney Morning Herald this morning, Parramatta on wages or Paris on a squillion. Well, you make the choice. In Australian football, where the choices are far more limited, Paddy Ryder may be about to choose between Tullamarine and Brisbane. The Lions have confirmed they're keen to make a bid for the Bomber if he can manufacture an escape from his current contract. Now, Essendon will be doing everything in its power to retain Ryder, who was first recruited to the club by Kevin Sheedy, who picks people from the Noongar tribe on suspicion after first seeing Polly Farmer handball 50 metres back in 1963. And don't be surprised now if Sheedy intercedes in this issue somewhere. And at last we can mention James Hird without the word suspended in the sentence. He's talking about recruiting former Brisbane and Melbourne forward Mitch Clark to the club, but earlier this year Clark retired from the game for personal reasons. And Port Adelaide has included Matt White in its squad to Fremantle, this despite his busted jaw. That's the play for flying to Fremantle. That's despite his busted jaw. Now, Coach Kenny Hinkley indicated on pay TV last night that White won't be travelling west just to help carry the drinks. And, of course, White's inclusion is in contrast to Fremantle's decision to omit Hayden Ballantyne, who also has a broken jaw. In surfing, a trio of Australians are flying at the pro event in California. Stephanie Gilmore, who scored a 9, Sally Fitzgibbon and Tyler Wright through to the quarterfinals, and they'll be watching an elimination final with interest when competition resumes at Trestles Beach. Carissa Moore, the defending world champion, has to get through that. And that would make the tussle for this year's world title very interesting indeed. In volleyball, the Australian team, the Volleyroos, have lost their second round match of the World Championships in Poland to Iran. The Australians lost the first 2 sets, won the third, but then, as they have in other contests, ran out of steam, losing the fourth set pretty badly. The Volleyroos' next game is against France, and that's tomorrow morning. In cycling, the Australian Michael Matthews has finished second on the 17th stage of the Tour of Spain. He lost a sprint finish to the final to the German John Degenkolb. Alberto Contador remains the overall leader. I'll have more sport tomorrow, Fran, including full previews of the AFL and NRL finals tomorrow night. It's that time of the year.
It certainly is. Thanks very much, Warwick. You're listening to Breakfast. It's 23 to 8.
G'day, it's Michael Cathcart here. Join me on Books and Arts this morning for a very charming take on the tragic tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. And our sound librarians Munson and Lee play us more treasures from the ABC's vast and precious collection of LP records. That's Books and Arts here at 10.
Well, it was a riveting sequel to the long-running political saga that surrounded Julia Gillard and the AWU Workplace Reform Association she helped establish when she was a young lawyer. Yesterday, the former Prime Minister appeared before the Royal Commission into alleged union corruption. And Julia Gillard flatly denied, as she has done for years now, that her home renovations in the 1990s were paid for by a fraudulent union slush fund.
I had no knowledge at that time, or knowledge at any time, about the banking arrangements of the Workplace Reform Association.
You've been answering questions about these issues for many years, correct?
I most certainly have, Mr. Stolcher. $5,000 in those days was a lot of money.
Yes.
I think I would remember it had it occurred. None of us get to go in a time machine and go backwards. Obviously, if one got to do the whole thing again, you would do things differently given what I know now.
Julia Gillard giving evidence at that Royal Commission yesterday. Well, Paul Bongiorno's in our Parliament House studio, and he's joined by the Guardian's Lenore Taylor, who was there in the courtroom during the Royal Commission. Paul, Lenore, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
Lenore, Julia Gillard was in the witness box for 4 hours. You were sitting there in that room watching it for most of that time, and you've written this morning that even without the authority of office, even under oath, even under a whole day's questioning by some of the best lawyers in the land, these allegations have progressed no further. Did we learn anything new from yesterday's testimony, and if not, is that the end of the matter?
Well, we learnt that the bathroom her boyfriend demolished while she was on holidays had red and yellow tiles in it, which painted quite a visual picture. But no, really, we didn't learn anything new. We went around the same evidence, had the same denials from Julia Gillard, the same questions about the legal work or advice she did to set up that AWU Workplace Reform Association. But really, it didn't go anywhere. We didn't get anything new.
Sitting there in the room, I wonder what it was like. I only tuned in for a little while on the television. It was almost all televised. And what struck me was Julia Gillard was very sort of cool under the examination, but very lawyerly. But the more I watched it, the more I felt this was very humiliating for a former Prime Minister. How did it seem in the room?
There were some moments when it did seem like that. I mean, you would remember when she gave 2 very long press conferences about these issues in Canberra. And at that time, she still had all the authority of office around her. So she was in command of the room. She'd walk in, she answered all the questions, but, she was in control. There was a moment yesterday when the Royal Commission had broken in for a tea break. And of course, until the Commissioner, Dyson Hayden, comes back in, it's not in session. She came in a little earlier, and she was just sort of standing there at the witness stand, looking around, and all the lawyers were chatting, and people were checking their phones, and she was by herself. No one was really sort of noticing her, and it was a moment when I thought, this is such a different environment for her, an environment where she's really stripped of all of that authority that she's had previously. But even in that circumstance, and even under oath, no more information ensued.
The government, this current government, has used its first year in office to establish 2 royal commissions. One into union corruption, the other into the home insulation scheme. Both have had former Prime Ministers called before them, Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd, to the pink backs. Paul, what kind of precedent do you think this sets for future governments?
Well, Fran, these 2 royal commissions have cost the taxpayers so far $77 million. This is in tightened Financial Times. Make no mistake about it, Fran, Tony Abbott has taken Australian politics down a very ugly path. From now on, incoming new Prime Ministers won't be able to resist the push to pursue their vanquished political opponents beyond the political grave. Normally, the convention in Australia has been that the people decide, they pass judgment, and you move on. The people have decided, they pass judgment on the Rudd-Gillard government. It no longer exists, but that's not good enough. I can tell you that there was pressure on Kevin Rudd when he was a new Prime Minister to set up, as they did in the United Kingdom, a royal commission into John Howard's handling of the intelligence that led us to the first Iraq War. Now, we know that that intelligence didn't exist. We were taken into that war based on a lie. But Kevin Rudd resisted that push from within the Labor Party, taking the view that I outlined earlier, that the people of Australia had already passed judgment on John Howard and the Howard government.
Lenore, what do you think? Do you think that it is a bad precedent, as I say, in the room watching it, or is there anything wrong with a former Prime Minister being called to account in some senses?
Look, I don't mind former Prime Ministers being called to account, but in this instance, the evidence wasn't there, and it's difficult to see how it ever could really be there. There are other issues that this Royal Commission is looking at, but in terms of Julia Gillard, it really has been, hasn't gone anywhere at all. And similarly with the Pinkback Royal Commission, we'd had lots of inquiries into that scheme. It was a badly, badly flawed scheme. We know that. But the Royal Commission didn't really add to our sum total of knowledge about all of the failings there. And the point of the Prime Minister and the former ministers giving evidence certainly wasn't to add to the sum total of knowledge, because it didn't succeed in doing that.
It's 17 to 8 on breakfast. Lenore, you've had a long day at the Royal Commission. I'll let you go now. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Lenore Taylor is political editor of The Guardian. Paul, you can stay where you are. Paul, ASIO and the AFP are expected to give more details today about the suspected terror threat facing Australia. It reportedly involves a small number of Muslim extremists who allegedly have, quote, settled plans to conduct terror strikes here at home. What do you think we're going to learn today? And this is part of a strategy, I guess, to prepare the community for a lifting of the threat level.
Yes, I think it is. I mean, we can be very grateful to ASIO and our law enforcement agencies, our spy agencies. Since in the last 13 years, there have been arrests, there have been attacks thwarted, and it's clear that this doesn't come cheaply, and it's clear it doesn't come without some disruption to the broader community. We have to take ASIO at face value here, that there are people in our midst who are extremists and who would do us damage. So hopefully the record of the last 13 years could be the record of the next 13 years, that our agencies are on top of the game and these extremists can't do their worst.
And Paul, just finally, it's reported today that Prime Minister Tony Abbott had a conversation with the Ukrainian President Poroshenko yesterday, and according to his office, our Prime Minister offered more than just the military technical cooperation he was speaking about last week. The quote is, he offered a lot of military equipment. We're still seeking comment from the RPM's office in Canberra on this. Do you think this could be true? We're offering a lot of military equipment?
Well, it was put out there that we were prepared to offer things like blankets and other things, but there has now been talk of even sending soldiers, that is, as military trainers into the Ukraine. Now, it's been pointed out by the analyst at who was an officer in Afghanistan and Iraq, James Brown, now at the Lowy Foundation, that this would involve us in a war. There is no doubt that Ukraine is at war with Russia, and if we put uniformed personnel in the Ukraine as military advisors, we're up to our armpits in that war. James Brown asks, and I'll ask the same question, where is the national interest in that? We didn't even have diplomatic representation in the Ukraine 2 months ago, and yet we're now involving ourselves in a military conflict there. It is hard to see the national interest in it, and I do know that there have been concerns along these lines expressed in the National Security Committee of Cabinet.
Paul Bongiorno, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Paul Bongiorno is contributing editor for the 10 Network, and earlier in that panel we were joined with Lenore Taylor, political editor with The Guardian. Noel Pearson's up next. It's 7:45.
Coming up, the second Boyer Lecture.
It is simply not an option to hang on and hope that economic circumstances will change. We must become the country of economic transformation, and this will be crucially dependent on investment in research, innovation, and education.
Professor Suzanne Corey on how the lucky country must wake up. The Boyer Lectures continue on Saturday at 1 after the Science Show on RN.
Ahead of the last election, Tony Abbott promised he would be a Prime Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. He promised a referendum to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the Constitution.